Hey everyone, welcome back. Ready for another deep dive? This time, we're tackling something big.
Huge. We're talking about the U.S. Constitution.
The whole thing.
The whole thing. Well, not like word for word reading it aloud.
Right, but we're going deeper than just the highlights reel, right?
Absolutely. We're going beyond the preamble and the Bill of Rights.
Which everyone kind of knows.
Exactly. We've got this awesome YouTube video. Someone put together the full text and audio.
So, like, we're right there with the framer.
In a way, yeah. It's a journey back to the very creation of a nation.
You know, prepping for this, I fell down some rabbit holes I never expected. Like, did you know there's a whole section on how they count people for representation?
Oh, yeah. Article 1, Section 2. That's where we get into the 3/5 compromise.
Heavy stuff. Really makes you think about how representation and power have been tied together from the very beginning.
It's unavoidable.
Yeah.
And we can't ignore how that compromise still affects us today. Voting rights, fair representation, it's all connected.
Okay, so, big picture, right? What was going on back then? Why did they even need a constitution?
Picture it. 1787. The Articles of Confederation, their first attempt at governing. Well,
Not going so well.
let's just say they needed an upgrade. The framers wanted a system that would actually work, something to unify these states.
So, that famous line, a more perfect union, they really meant it.
Oh yeah, it wasn't just fancy wording. They were striving for something better, something more stable and effective.
And all those goals listed in the preamble, justice, tranquility, defense, those were real needs, not just lofty ideals.
They were deeply felt. Fresh out of a war for independence, they craved stability, security, a government that truly represented the people.
So how'd they go about building this new government? The Constitution itself is pretty dense.
It's a long document for sure, but it has a clear structure like a blueprint. Articles, sections, it all lays out how the government should function.
And at the heart of it all is that separation of powers, right?
It's the famous checks and balances.
Yeah.
They split the government into 3 branches.
Legislative, executive, judicial, each one keeping the others in check.
Exactly. No one branch gets too powerful. It all goes back to preventing tyranny.
So smart, still relevant today, all these centuries later.
It is. Now, speaking of those branches, let's take a closer look, starting with Article 1, which sets up the legislative branch.
That's Congress, right, making the laws.
Right, with 2 chambers, the House of Representatives and the Senate. Each plays a unique role in the process.
Then we have Article 2, all about the executive branch.
Headed by the president. Enforcing the laws, commanding the military, all that.
And finally, Article 3 brings in the judicial branch, the courts.
Interpreting the laws, making sure they're applied fairly, keeping everyone in line, the legislature, the executive, everyone.
Amazing how the system they designed back then still shapes our political debates today.
Absolutely. It's a testament to their foresight.
Yeah.
And speaking of looking back, I found it interesting, the age and citizenship requirements for each branch.
Right, like senators have to be older than representatives. Why is that?
There are a few theories. One thought is they wanted the Senate to be more, experienced, wiser, more deliberative.
So it's not just about age, but also the perspective they bring to the table.
Exactly. Different voices, different viewpoints. Which brings us back to that section you mentioned, Article 1, Section 2, and the question of representation.
And the 3/5 compromise, it's hard to even fathom that today.
It's a dark part of our history.
And
Southern states, with their reliance on slavery, they wanted more power in Congress, even if it meant dehumanizing people to get it.
And it wasn't just a one-time thing. It echoes through history. It affects how we think about voting rights and elections, even today.
Without a doubt, the past is always with us. We have to acknowledge that. It's the only way we can learn and move forward.
So true. Okay, we've talked about the structure, the branches, representation, but the Constitution also lays out what the government can actually do, right?
It does. It gets down to the nitty-gritty. What are the powers of each branch? What can they do? What can't they do? It's all spelled out.
I was struck by how detailed it is. They really tried to think of everything, huh?
It's fascinating to see their priorities. Coining money, post offices, patents, declaring war, all in there.
But they also set limits. Like, they specifically said Congress can't pass ex post facto laws. Ex post facto? What's that all about?
Basically, it means you can't be punished for something that was legal when you did it, but later became illegal.
Makes sense. Fairness, right.
Yeah.
No changing the rules after the game's already been played.
Exactly. They wanted a system that was clear, consistent, fair.
It's incredible how much thought they put into this and how those ideas still resonate today.
I know, but we've only just begun. There's so much more to explore.
So much more. We'll be back with part 2 after the break.
Welcome back. Now, where we left off, we were talking about how detailed the Constitution is.
Right, all those specifics about what the government can and can't do.
But the thing is, they knew they couldn't predict everything.
Like, they couldn't account for every possible situation that might come up in the future.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So they built in a mechanism for change, a way to adapt.
The amendments.
The amendments. 27 of them so far.
Which is pretty impressive considering how hard it is to actually amend the Constitution.
Oh, yeah, it's not a simple process. It takes a supermajority vote in both houses of Congress.
Yeah.
And then it has to be ratified by 3/4 of the states.
So, they really had to believe in something to go through all that trouble.
Right. Which makes the amendments we do have even more significant. Speaking of which, we got to start with the big one.
The Bill of Rights. The first 10 amendments.
Those are the bedrocks, guaranteeing so many freedoms we often take for granted today.
Like speech, religion, the press, the right to bear arms, protection from unreasonable searches. It's a lot.
It is. And what's so interesting is those rights, laid out all those years ago, they're still so hotly debated today.
Like, what did the right to bear arms really mean back then? How does that translate to our world now?
It's an ongoing conversation, isn't it?
Sure.
Courts, lawmakers, citizens, we're all wrestling with these questions.
Which shows you the Constitution isn't some dusty old document. It's alive, it's relevant, it's still shaping how we live and think.
Absolutely. It's the foundation, but it's also a starting point for debate and interpretation.
Okay, so beyond the Bill of Rights, we have 17 other amendments. Some pretty major changes to American society in there.
Big ones, yeah. Like the Reconstruction Amendments.
The 13th, 14th, and 15th passed right after the Civil War.
Huge turning point in our history. The 13th? Well, that one's pretty straightforward.
Abolishing slavery, finally.
But of course, it wasn't as simple as just saying slavery is over.
There was still so much to work out, so much injustice to overcome.
Exactly. That's where the 14th Amendment comes in, granting citizenship to everyone born in the U.S.
Including formerly enslaved people.
And guaranteeing equal protection under the law. That's huge.
It's like they were redefining what it means to be an American.
Exactly. And laying the groundwork for so many civil rights movements to come.
Though it wasn't an easy path. Even with those amendments, it was an uphill battle for equality.
Definitely not. Think about Plessy Ferguson. The Supreme Court actually upheld separate but equal.
Decades of fighting to overturn that. And it still goes on, the struggle for equal rights.
It does. It's a reminder that just because something's written in the Constitution, it doesn't mean it's automatically reality.
There's always work to be done, always more to fight for.
Well said. Now, on a more positive note, we got to talk about the 19th Amendment. Women's suffrage.
Finally, the right to vote. It took long enough.
Can you imagine being told you can't vote simply because you're a woman?
It's mind-boggling. But hey, they fought for it and they won, and it opened so many doors for women.
Oh, yeah. Not just in politics, but in every aspect of life. Education, work, you name it.
Okay, so we've covered some big, impactful amendments, but I gotta admit, I'm kind of curious about some of the more obscure ones.
The ones that make you scratch your head a little.
Yeah, like the Third Amendment, no quartering soldiers in private homes. What was that all about?
Well, remember, the Constitution was born out of a very specific historical moment.
Right. They'd just fought a war against a government that forced colonists to house troops.
So it's no wonder they were like, nope, not doing that again. Protecting their homes, their privacy.
Okay, that makes sense. See, even those seemingly random details, they tell a story.
They do. It's all about understanding the context, the fears, the hopes of the people who wrote this document.
Speaking of context, Article 1, Section 9, it says Congress can't pass ex post facto laws. What does that even mean?
Ex post facto, it's Latin, basically means after the fact.
Oh.
So you can't be punished for something that wasn't a crime when you did it.
Like they can't just change the law and then go back and punish people retroactively.
Exactly. It's about fairness.
Hmm.
It's about having a legal system that people can trust. You should know what the rules are, and those rules shouldn't just change on a whim.
It's about stability, right? A society where the law is consistent and predictable.
Exactly. Ex post facto laws, they throw all that out the window.
Yeah.
They undermine the whole idea of a fair and just system.
Wow, okay, so we've covered a lot here. From the big picture to the nitty-gritty details. What's the key takeaway for our listeners?
I think it's this. The Constitution, it's not just some old document. It's a living thing. It's changed over time, it's still evolving, and it continues to shape our lives in ways we might not even realize.
And we're all part of that evolution. We're all part of the ongoing conversation about what it means to be an American, what rights we value, what kind of society we want to build.
And that conversation, it's far from over.
We're back. I feel like we could talk about the Constitution forever.
Right. There's just so much there. Every
Yeah.
time you dig in, there's another layer, another story.
So big picture for this last part, I keep thinking about accountability. It seems like that was a huge concern for the framers.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, they just fought a revolution to get away from a tyrannical government.
So they wanted to make sure that this new government, the one they were building, wouldn't become tyrannical too.
Exactly. They were obsessed with preventing the abuse of power. That's why they put in all those checks and balances.
Like the separation of powers we talked about, the different branches keeping each other in line.
Right. And they also made sure to protect individual rights. But one of the most striking examples, I think, is the process of impeachment.
Impeachment, yeah. Article I lays it all out. The House can impeach, the Senate holds the trial.
It's not a quick or easy process, which is by design.
They didn't want to make it too simple to remove someone from office.
It's a serious matter. It takes a two-thirds majority in the Senate to convict. High bar to clear.
So no one's above the law, but there are safeguards in place to make sure it's not abused.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's a powerful reminder that even the most powerful people in government are accountable. They can be held responsible for their actions.
It's almost like they're saying, look, power corrupts, so we're building in a way to deal with that.
Right. It's a recognition of human nature. And it's also a testament to their commitment to democracy. The people have a voice, even when it comes to holding their leaders accountable.
It's a pretty incredible thing when you think about it. So as we wrap up this whole deep dive into the Constitution, what's the message you want to leave our listeners with?
The Constitution, it's not just a dusty old document, you know. It's a living, breathing thing. It's a conversation that started centuries ago, and it's still going on today.
We're all part of that conversation. Every time we vote, every time we speak out about an issue we care about, we're engaging with these ideas, these principles.
Exactly. The Constitution, it belongs to all of us. It's up to each generation to interpret it, to apply it to the challenges of their time. It's a guide, but it's not a set of fixed answers. It's a starting point for the ongoing work of building a more perfect union.
I love that. It's a reminder that we all have a role to play in shaping the future of our country. Well said. And listeners, we hope you enjoyed this deep dive into the U.S. Constitution. Keep those minds curious, and we'll see you next time.